Welcome back to a brand new round of Arts World Headlines, honeys, hand-curated by yours truly for your enjoyment and for your knowledge. We've got a whole new list this week that features quite a bit of in-depth stories, so I'm not going to talk too much before we get started, outside of reminding you that we always want to hear your feedback on the stories we choose. What would you like to hear more or less of? DM us and let us know. And with that, your Beesness. We'll start today with some updates on stories past. The first and probably most exciting, Judge Colleen McMahon of the Federal District Court in Manhattan ruled that cancellations to more than 1,400 grants approved by the National Endowment for the Humanities by the Elon Musk-led Department of Governmental Efficiency were unconstitutional and ordered the organization to rescind the cancellations. This ruling was made in favor of the plaintiffs in two lawsuits which were filed last year and which successfully contended that DOGE had violated the First and Fifth Amendments when it used ChatGPT to determine which grants to cancel based on whether or not they mentioned diversity, equity, and inclusion in their programs. The judge wrote in her ruling, quote, "The injury is not limited to the loss of money. It includes the disruption of protected expression, the interruption of ongoing research and publication, the cancellation or suspension of humanities programming, and the chilling effect caused by the government's use of viewpoint-based and unauthorized criteria to terminate federal grants," end quote. Big win for the arts and humanities there. Sources also reported that the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees Union has filed charges against the Kennedy Center over its layoffs, accusing the institution of unfair labor practices, more specifically accusing it of unlawfully firing dozens of employees and of using the contested renovation closure plan as a false pretense for slashing jobs in a complaint that it filed Monday with the National Labor Relations Board. Trump's previously announced closure of the center for 2 years for aforementioned major renovations has also been challenged by two lawsuits alleging that this is an attempt to save face after Trump's actions caused ticket sales to plunge and artists to cancel their planned events over the last year. And the San Francisco Chronicle reported last week that the Vaillancourt fountain caught fire during its controversial removal. The brutalist precast concrete local landmark caught fire on Wednesday morning as it was being disassembled in order to make way for a $32.5 million transformation of its home space, Embarcadero Plaza, and the nearby playground into a 5-acre park. Park rangers who responded to the incident told Art Forum and other sources that crew members were using blowtorches to cut the welded structure in the process, which set the rubber tubing and debris inside of its cantilevered arms alight. According to NBC Bay Area, smoke generated by the incident was so intense that nearby paddleboard courts had to be temporarily evacuated, but the fire was quickly brought under control and extinguished. Comate, director of communications for the San Francisco Arts Commission, said that, quote, "no major damage," end quote, was done to the art piece. We also heard that Bard's president, Leon Botstein, has finally retired. The leader of the institution since 1975 announced his June 30th departure on Friday after an independent report conducted by the law firm Wilmer Hale and commissioned by Bard's Board of Trustees found that he had been, quote, "not fully accurate," end quote, in his public accounts of his relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The findings did not identify illegal conduct on Botstein's part, but concluded that that relationship and his mention in the infamous files over 2,800 times raised enough concern to finally force him out. The Why We Care Here, as Art News explains, quote, "Botstein's retirement is a consequential moment for the art world. Bard is home to the Center for Curatorial Studies, one of the most prominent graduate programs in curatorial practice in the United States, and its affiliated CCS Hessel Museum of Art. Botstein's 5-decade tenure had made the school a fixture in art world institutional life," end quote. Across the Pacific, meanwhile, a former Korean prosecutor was convicted in an alleged Lee Ufan painting bribery scheme. The Seoul High Court this week overturned an earlier acquittal of the former senior prosecutor Kim Sang-min, finding him guilty of violating South Korea's anti-corruption law in his attempt to buy political influence. According to the Chosun Daily, prosecutors say that he gifted a Lee Ufan painting from Dots, number 800-298, valued at 140 million won, or roughly 95.5 US thousand, to former First Lady Kim Kyon-hee in exchange for political support in securing a nomination from the Conservative People Power Party ahead of the nation's 2024 parliamentary elections. The twist that made the headline worth reviewing, however, Kim's defense reportedly argued that the Ufan work was actually a forgery worth less than 1 million won, or about 680 US dollars, in an attempt to circumvent the claim that that gift was high value and thus in violation of the law. Nevertheless, the appeals court sentenced him to 3 years of suspension plus 2 years of prison for the bribery charges, on top of a separate 1-year suspended sentence tied to illegal political donations. With a new week came even more historic Biennale news, and now I know I've said that word, Biennale, so many different ways so far. It's just because every language has their own pronunciation of the term, and so I just needed to get the Italian one. In any case, historic strike plans overshadowed the Venice Biennale buzz ahead of its opening. The strike, set to last 24 hours, was organized by the international cultural activist organization Art Not Genocide Alliance in collaboration with Italian activist groups Biennalosine Mi Riconski, Sale Docs, and Vogliamo Tutt'altro. And the Why We Care Here, Hyperallergic, confirmed it was, quote, the first cultural strike in the Biennale's 131-year history, end quote. The striking parties said in a joint statement, quote, no artist or cultural worker should be asked to share a platform with a state perpetrating genocide, end quote. As I mentioned, though, plenty of action in the week leading up to the opening. Artforum reports that the Latvian pavilion was particularly outspoken, encouraging anyone attending the Biennale to wear a design made by artist Chris Salmanis, which reads, quote, death in Venice, Russia go home, end quote. The Latvian pavilion also organized, in collaboration with the Lithuanian and Estonian pavilions, a walk between their 3 national exhibitions in solidarity with Ukraine on May 6th, dedicated to cultural workers from Ukraine. Solvita Krese, the director of the Latvian Center for Contemporary Art in Riga and commissioner of the Latvian Pavilion, was quoted in Art News saying, quote, in today's geopolitical reality, we are reminded that freedom is never self-evident. It must be defended. The Venice Biennale's decision to allow Russia's participation raises urgent questions about the responsibility of cultural institutions, end quote. And yes, it does. That's why we keep talking about the Biennale in the Beesness. Biennale President Pietrangelo Buttafuoco has focused his public statements, even on Wednesday of last week, on the message that his exhibition is, quote, not a court, end quote, and should remain a place for dialogue rather than exclusion, in another attempt to stress the Biennale as a space of political neutrality. But it seems as though that's exactly what this exhibition has turned into, is a court of public opinion. On opening day, Saturday at 4:30 p.m., thousands of people marched on the Via Garibaldi, filling the city streets with Palestinian flags and banners, to the barricaded in preparation Arsenale, host of the Israeli representative Belu Simeon Fainaru's artworks. Some minor clashes with armed police took place there before the marchers backed off. This after another pro-Palestine activism event on the very first day of previews, May 6th. Those protesters successfully demanded the pavilion be shut down immediately, but it only stayed closed for about a half an hour. The same morning, according to Art Review, 60 artists assembled in front of the entrance to the Biennale's park space to, quote-unquote, sonically occupy it in a collective protest action against Israel's participation. The next morning, dissident artists Pussy Riot and the Ukrainian group Femin led a protest of around 50 participants at the Russian pavilion clad in pink balaclavas while waving Ukrainian flags, setting off pink smoke, and calling for disobedience. Even as almost half of the 111 artists, duos, and collectives included in the main exhibition in minor keys, as well as 16 National Pavilion exhibitors, issued their withdrawal from consideration for the so-called Visitor Lion Prizes on May 9th in solidarity with the previously resigned jury. That list includes such well-known names as Alfredo Jar, Tuan Andrew Nijin, Odobong Nkanga, and Walid Rad. Even more amazing, honeys, on top of all of those kind of singular instances of protests, we saw 27 out of 100 of the Biennale's national pavilions affected by the strike and or closing on their own merits, according to Hyperallergic. These include Austria, Belgium, Britain, Cyprus, Ecuador, Egypt, Estonia, Finland, France, Great Britain, Iceland, Ireland, Japan, Lebanon, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Malta, Poland, Portugal, Slovenia, South Korea, Spain, Switzerland, Turkey, and Ukraine. A few of those simply bore signs noting that their team members had chosen to participate in the strike, while others' signs read, quote, "We stand with Palestine," end quote. The main exhibition at the Arsenale, for which so many dropped out of considerations for awards, was closed by the afternoon of opening day. I'm pretty sure that's an unprecedented thing as well. Multiple featured artists in the international exhibition had attached Palestinian flags or pro-Palestine signs to their works in advance of that closure. And in response to Boutafogo's statements, one such artist, Nina Kachadorian, told Hyperallergic, quote, "I come from a family of genocide survivors, and genocide is personal, but also anyone, I think, with a moral conscience should realize what is happening is a genocide and should stand against it in whatever way they can," end quote. Exhibitor Anish Kapoor, who previously represented England in the 1990 Biennale, apparently agreed with her, calling the jury's decision to resign en masse courageous while condemning inclusion of the U.S. in the Venice Biennale, saying that it should be boycotted from the event because of the government's, quote, "abhorrent politics of hate," end quote, and, quote, "incessant warmongering," end quote. Ultimately, these critics see the Biennale's claim to neutrality as precisely what's at stake and being risked by the inclusion of Israel and Russia, obviously, but also, apparently, even the United States. Extra eyebrow raising, even though the U.S. is participating and getting bad reviews doing it, the Biennale organizers announced Monday that Iran had dropped out and would no longer be exhibiting its planned pavilion, but did not provide details as to the reasoning behind the last-minute withdrawal. Even more shocking, the revelation that Israel's artist reportedly threatened legal action against the Venice Biennale jury before their resignation, which may shed light on that sudden situation. According to reports first published last week by Italian news agency Ad Kronos, Bellu Simeon Finero accused the Biennale of, quote, "racial discrimination and anti-Semitism," end quote, and threatened to file suit in the European Court of Human Rights over it after the women-led jury stated its intent to omit nations, quote, "whose leaders are currently charged with crimes against humanity by the International Criminal Court," end quote, on April 22nd. The art fair's officials then told the jury members that they could be, quote, "held personally liable for damages in the event of a dispute," end quote, should the artist move forward. Other trusted regular sources confirmed these allegations, but event spokespeople have kept quiet. Fainero said he was happy to hear of the resignation, as he, quote, "can't be judged by belonging to a country or race," end quote, in a recent interview with the New York Times. It's truly incredible, honeys, to watch what was one of the most well-respected arts events in the world turn into, in the course of this year, one of the biggest hot messes, protest-laden, conflict-fueled situations the art world has ever seen. And moving on to entirely new news, a legal dispute has threatened an upcoming auction of Titanic artifacts. The company that owns the salvage rights to the Titanic shipwreck, itself called RMS Titanic, wants to auction nearly 100 items recovered in a 1987 joint expedition with the French government. But the French government only lent its support to the expedition and later gave the U.S. company the title to the artifacts under the agreement that whatever was recovered would not be sold. Now, a judge, along with the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has shut down their efforts and demanded that details about the sale be made public under the argument that that auction would violate a previous legal ruling requiring the Titanic collection to remain intact. The art newspaper reported last week that Bogota's Mambo Museum has lost its director. Martha Ortiz has left the institution following the departure of its artistic director, Eugenio Viola, in February, as well as accusations that she harassed staff and created a toxic workplace environment. Ortiz became the director of the museum in 2024 with no experience in the field, having worked previously in journalism and media, but the museum's statement only said that she was retiring and that the board was looking for new leadership, leaving lots of questions unanswered about this departure. We also learned last week, honeys, that 85% of all U.S. museums need repairs. This according to a survey conducted in March by the U.S. Government Accountability Office and published by Art Newspaper as well as Art Forum. But even more scary is this. 77% of U.S. museums have at least one structural issue that puts their entire collections at risk. And the reason why is the most important part of this story. Construction-related expenses don't fall under the umbrella of costs that would qualify for the sort of federal stipends generally available to American museums. A spokesperson for the American Alliance of Museums told the art newspaper that this data, quote, aligns very closely with what we've been hearing from museums across the country for years. Deferred maintenance is not just a facilities issue, it directly affects a museum's ability to care for its collections, serve its community, and remain remain open and accessible to the public. What would help most is sustained investment that recognizes facilities as essential infrastructure, end quote. The broad realities of this data are important too. As ArtNet puts it, the scope of these findings, quote, cuts against the usual image of the museum as a well-funded institution in a grand building, end quote, and reminds us that most of our country's roughly 16,700 museums are under-resourced operations, often housed in historic structures that are expensive to maintain and hard to upgrade. And the timing is the final why we care in this story. The GAO report comes as Congress is weighing the future of the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the main federal agency supporting museums whose budget currently stands at just under $300 million. Any further loss in funding, and it's very possible that these 77 or even 85% of museums will face an even more dire future. Luxury fashion house Chanel announced in a statement on Tuesday that it will officially launch an annual one-year fellowship collaboration with the Guggenheim in fall of 2026. The fellow themselves will be someone, quote, dedicated to advancing collection studies and curatorial research, end quote. At the MA and PhD levels, the newly established program is therefore intended to complement their existing fellowship and internship programs and represents the fashion house's, quote, long-term investment in human intelligence, end quote, in the words of Yana Peel, the company's president of arts, culture, and heritage. And two ascendant philanthropists, as our sources called them, made a $23 million donation to the Met. Recently elected Board of Trustees member / co-founder and former CEO of Away Luggage, Jennifer Rubio, and her husband / co-founder of the workplace team messaging application Slack, Stuart Butterfield, made the gift endowing the Met's long-standing internships for undergraduate and graduate students in perpetuity via their foundation, and the couple made an additional donation in support of the museum's upcoming Tang Wing for Modern and Contemporary Art scheduled to open in 2030. We noticed the headline, honeys, because Rubio is presently also the youngest trustee and co-funds the Whitney's Free Friday Nights program already. We like to see her killing it and doing good along the way. Also killing it, Amy Sherald, who brought her Outwin Buchever Prize-winning paintings to life for the art-themed Met Gala. She dressed as the little girl in her 2014 painting, Miss Everything, Unsuppressed Deliverance, currently featured in her traveling survey, which will open at Atlanta's High Museum of Art on May 15th, and which broke records in its previous hosting venue. Cheryl therefore put a fun twist on this year's gala, responding to the Institute's spring exhibition, Costume Art, though according to Art Forum, quote, this year's gala raised a record $42 million as well as the hackles of those troubled by the increasing wealth gap in the U.S., which is the highest it's been in 3 decades, end quote. Which is why we may have seen so many protests against the event erupting across Manhattan last week. The activist group Everyone Hates Elon projected a video of a 72-year-old Amazon worker speaking about the low wages that she and her colleagues received onto the side of Bezos' luxury apartment building on Madison Avenue the night before the event, May 3rd, before the local advocacy group Rise and Resist mounted a protest several blocks away the night of. In its own red-carpeted and costumed protest called Resistance Runway, Hyperallergic writes that the outfits featured therein alluded to issues of trans rights, impending fascism, and many advocated for quote-unquote eating the rich. But still, quote, as participants formed an impromptu sidewalk dance party to the tune of ABBA's Money, 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 MC J.W. Walker described the event as, inner quote, amazingly joyous, end all quotes. Also, after co-introducing the pied-à-terre tax meant to affect the ultra-wealthy and close the city's budget gap, New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani skipped the event, instead lauding unsung fashion industry workers on his X account. The UK-based anti-billionaire group Everybody Hates Elon took it one step further. Other outlets reported that hundreds of bottles of, quote, what appeared to be urine, end quote, were found in the Met leading up to the event, in apparent reference to claims by Amazon delivery workers that they were forced to go in plastic bottles under severe time constraints. The group wrote in an Instagram statement that it had left the quote-unquote piss bottles to call attention to how, quote, the Met Museum is taking the piss by having Jeff Bezos honored as their gala host, end quote. In the end, after all that outcry, Bezos was a no-show and his wife walked alone. And on the topic of protests, the American Folk Art Museum's workers picketed its gala calling for higher wages. Staffers say they were forced to take action at the annual gala on Wednesday night, along with UAW Local 2110 organizers, after negotiations for a new contract remained stalled for nearly 2 years. They chanted, "What's disgusting? Union busting. What's outrageous? Poverty wages," while Eve Erickson, the museum's development associate for institutional giving, told Hyperallergic, quote, "The museum can raise all the money it wants, but if it doesn't pay its workers fairly, then the museum can't function well. There's no art without the museum's staff," end quote. The union representatives requested a 3-year contract and increased wages for these workers to $30 per hour by the end of the 3rd year in October of 2024, when the negotiations began, but deemed the counteroffer at that time from museum leaders unacceptable, and negotiations have soured since. According to our sources, museum officials would not reveal how much money the gala raised or say when they might complete negotiations, but were surprisingly quote-unquote intimate with protesters, as our sources state that, quote, several trustees hugged unionized museum staff and took flyers and UAW buttons before they went inside, end quote, and other donors verbalized their support of the demonstration. This may be a sign of new hope for a better negotiation going forward. Yet Trump's continued assertion of his authority over public spaces in D.C. has led some, namely the Associated Press, to dub him the president of Parks and Rec. Even as his so-called Garden of Heroes project stalls, the ballroom costs and lawsuits mount, and Trump pushes for a triumphal arch near Arlington Cemetery amid park closures for quote-unquote rehabbing across D.C., the Republican president has talked of transforming the East Potomac Park, home to an affordable, accessible public golf course, into a posh, quote, U.S. Open caliber course, end quote. According to Associated Press, the nonprofit that operates the course had said by late Friday it would continue managing the space until the National Park Service begins a quote-unquote historic restoration, which might become necessary as preservation advocates are taking the government to court because of debris dumped at the park from the White House East Wing demolition, which tested positive for lead. Notably, that headline dropped the same week we learned that the National Capital Planning Commission met to review the Trump administration's proposal to paint the Granite Eisenhower Executive Office building in D.C. white. The plan would cost an estimated $7.5 million and has generated more than 2,000 public comments, most of them negative, while those in the field, such as architects and preservationists, ring alarm bells about the long-term damage that paint could cause to its marble facade, as well as the paint's need for constant maintenance. All the same, final approval from the Commission of Fine Arts as well as the National Capital Planning Commission is likely, since Trump has loaded both with his supporters. The reason we care is that what we're ultimately seeing is Trump is guaranteeing himself a lasting imprint, quote, on a city where he won just 6.5% of the vote in 2024, end quote, as our sources note. But even more striking is the prioritization of this in light of everything else. Said presidential historian Julian Zelizer of Princeton University, quote, it's not a zero-sum game, but obviously all presidents have limited amounts of capital they can use and limited amounts of attention that they have to give, and he's deciding, in a moment of war, a moment of economic instability, that this is a priority, end quote. Although it may just be for those very reasons that Republicans are trying to force focus on / dialogue of these pricey projects instead of policy accomplishments. Rebecca Miller, the executive director of DC Preservation League, who has spent 23 years at the organization, which itself has worked with administrations of both parties, called the Trump moves in her statements to Associated Press, quote, highly unusual, end quote. Yet this distraction plan, if that's what it is, doesn't seem to be working. A recent joint Washington Post, ABC News, and Ipsos poll conducted in late April found that 52% of Americans oppose Trump's planned arch, including 3/5 of independents, while Americans oppose the ballroom by a 2-to-1 margin. Last month's shooting at the White House Correspondents Association dinner notably did not move the needle on this, despite Trump citing it as further justification for the replacement secure facility. And still, the money is flowing. Republican senators added $1 billion in White House security upgrades for the ballroom to an unrelated bill this week, despite Trump's initial assurances that the project would not use taxpayer funds. Which brings us to the big why we care number 2, the solution boogaloo. And that solution is statehood. D.C. council member and top candidate in the mayor's race, Janice Lewis-George, said that Trump's impact on the city is broader than the renovations, referring to the troop deployments as a quote-unquote federal occupation and noting the fallout from cuts to the federal workforce, arguing that these are reasons for city officials to do a better job of making their case for statehood in Congress. Attempts to make Washington, D.C. its own state have been unsuccessful in the past, but may be an important strategy to revisit in current times. And just a few more announcements for the honeys before we go. The 2026 Max Mara Art Prize for Women has gone to Dian Suci. The Yogyakarta-based Indonesian artist has been afforded the opportunity to spend a 6-month residency in Italy, during which she will travel through various cities to conduct site visits and develop her craft. We're featuring this headline, honeys, because the art prize had previously centered around supporting UK-based female artists who'd not previously had a major solo exhibition, but has expanded over the years to cater to emerging and mid-career artists from all over the world who identify as women. The selection of Dian Suci represents this growth. We also learned that 50 urban artists from 17 countries have converged on one of Europe's most important industrial landmarks, the Völklinger Hut or Völklingen Ironworks, for the Urban Art Biennale of 2026. Völklinger Hut or Völklingen Ironworks for the Urban Art Biennale of 2026. The gathering has grown into a Biennale tradition over the past decade and a half, with the ironworks itself spreading over nearly a 15-acre site in which a maze of chimneys and furnaces still boast ominous industrial-era warning signs with risks such as a danger of crushing. The ironworks have been on UNESCO's World Heritage List since being recognized as the, quote, only intact example in the whole of Western Europe and North America of an integrated ironworks that was built and equipped in the 19th and 20th centuries, end quote. And finally, we learned that an unrealized artwork by formerly featured artists here, Christo and Jean-Claude, will take over the Gagosian in London. The exhibition, titled Christo Air, opens May 21st and runs through late August and is scheduled to feature never-before-seen works. According to our sources, one of these will be Air Package on a Ceiling, a previously unrealized installation described as a kind of internally lit cloud, which Christo designed in 1968 for the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia, but never mounted due to technical limitations. We also have a connection to that full-length episode on Christo and Jean-Claude here. Another work in the Gagosian show will be Wrapped Automobile Volvo Model PV 544 from 1981, which is a car wrapped in the manner which made Christo famous that has not been shown in 30 years. And that, honeys, has been your Beesness. We are still hard at work at Frank Lloyd Wright and hoping to drop that within a week, so keep your eyes peeled. But until then, hydrate or dihydrate, follow us on social media, subscribe to the Patreon and the Substack. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk soon. This episode of Highbrow Honeys the Beesness was researched, fact-checked, hosted, recorded, and edited by yours truly, master's degree holder Celia Bugno, but you can, as always, thank Chris Meinhold for our music.